Welcome, everyone. This is episode number 12. My guest today is Patrick Miller, the author of several books: How to Be Spiritual Without Being Religious, the forgiveness book, Healing the Wounds We Don't Deserve, Living with Miracles, Necessary Wisdom, Mostly a Mystic, Love After Life, Instructions of the Spirit, the Christ Poems, and Understanding A Course in Miracles, whose second edition is now out. Patrick was trained as an investigative journalist, and he began writing about spirituality, the human potential, creativity after a 7-year illness, which initiated his spiritual path. Since that time, he has intensively studied A Course in Miracles, Enneagram system of personality, Jungian depth psychology, shamanism, and related fields of contemporary spirituality. As a journalist, Patrick has written over 100 articles for Yoga Journal, The Sun, Elephant Journal Online, and many other media. He's also the founder of Fearless Books and Literary Services and has helped other authors, such as Gary Renard, prepare manuscripts for such major publishers as Hay House. Patrick continues to provide manuscript consultations, editing, assisted publishing, and professional representation to published and unpublished authors working in fiction and nonfiction. He's also a semi-professional photographer. Patrick came on this podcast to talk to me about illness, forgiveness, and ways in which we can look at the physical body and unhealed relationships through the lens of forgiveness, the way A Course in Miracles describes it. I really enjoyed talking to Patrick and getting to know him a bit. He's a very thoughtful man who has taken the time to reflect on his own ideas and those he's learned throughout his life. It was really a pleasure talking to him. I learned a lot from this interview, and I hope you too will find yourself in what Patrick has to say. Please join me in this conversation with Patrick Miller today. Welcome, everyone. Patrick, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show today.
Thank you.
I'm going to start by asking you, for our listeners, to introduce yourself a little bit and tell us perhaps, how did you come to know A Course in Miracles? And when in time did you come across the Course in Miracles?
I remember it well. It was 1985. I had been mysteriously ill for several weeks. Mysteriously and severely ill. I mean, I got sick overnight with what I thought was a flu, but it just was not going away. And it would be a while before I got the diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, which at that time was not even that well known and was thought to influence chiefly women. But to make a long story short, and a lot of doctors' visit short, I finally found a holistic physician who specialized in AIDS, and he knew quite a bit about autoimmune diseases. And when he made the diagnosis, he said the good news is you don't have a degenerative immune condition and you're not going to die. He said you have an autoimmune condition, which means you're going to wish you could die. which proved true over time. But I ran through, as I say, all kinds of doctors. I ran through a short course of psychotherapy. And during that time, I came across mention of the Course in a book by Willis Harman. Mm-hmm. And he described it as a discipline of affirmations, basically. And I was very skeptical to hear about that because I had a background as investigative reporter. I was agnostic, skeptical, rational, and I didn't, see how.
You're well known as being a very tough cookie. For anybody that is interested in sending their manuscripts over to you, know that it will be trashed. It will be looked at, examined, turned upside down for your own benefit.
Yeah. So I didn't, but then Willis said something in the book that kind of turned me around. And he said, for those who are skeptical of the idea that affirmations can have a powerful effect on the mind, may need to look at the fact of what negative thoughts do to their mind and how often they have them. And that really produced a shock because I realized, while I'm skeptical of the idea of repeating positive ideas myself, yes, I repeat negative ideas constantly. and I take them as gospel truth. So he said the course was a discipline of an opposite way of thinking than all that negativity. So I was curious. And my holistic doctor's office happened to be across the street from a metaphysical bookshop. And I went there to look at the course once, but it was still in hardcover at the time and very expensive. And my
that should have been the first edition, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back then, yeah.
And so my skeptical mind kicked in and said, well, this is just another ripoff. Forget about that. And then, but I couldn't get it out of my mind. And this is something you'll hear when you talk to people who encountered the course. They couldn't get it out of their mind. Ken Wapnick told me, he said he'd heard many stories of people who got the course, couldn't deal with it, put it on a shelf, but they couldn't get it out of their mind, and years later they would pick it up. So I've always thought, as Ken did, that the course speaks primarily to the subconscious, which is why we have so much difficulty with it consciously trying to figure out, and that it's really meant to, all the difficulty of working with it, it's meant to be that way. It's meant to defeat the ego.
Beautiful.
It's meant to prevent us from figuring it out. But so I had this impulse to take another look at it. And so the next time I saw my doctor, I went back to the bookstore, and the bookstore owner was just shelving the new 3-in-1 paperback edition. It was literally taking them out of the box and putting them on the shelf.
Wow.
And I said, is that A Course in Miracles, the same one that was in hardcover? And he said, yes. He said, it just came today. And I saw that it was a lot cheaper. And so
he happened to be there.
Yeah, that kicked away that last skeptical reservation, and I got it. And, and I have to say, it was a secret I kept for a couple months, because one of the symptoms of chronic fatigue is brain fog, unclear thinking. And I really thought, I was so anti-religious that the language of the course really disturbed me. And yet I was drawn to it. And I thought I might be losing my mind. So I didn't tell anybody about it. Finally, I'd been seeing this therapist because it had dawned on me that the illness was probably not just physical. So I had decided I better get myself into therapy. But I had a very passive therapist who just listened and said yes and tried to be supportive, but he didn't direct me very much. And 4 or 5 weeks after I'd started the course, I went in to see him kind of exasperated and said, I really feel like this course of therapy is not going anywhere. You're very kind and attentive, but I'm not getting any ideas of how to go forward out of this. And he said, well, what do you think would be a way out of it? And I said, well, I haven't told anyone this, but I ran across this very strange teaching called A Course in Miracles. It seems to have this magnetic draw upon me, but I don't know anyone who knows anything about it. I don't know if it's good or bad, if it's a sign I'm losing my mind. And I said, in case you happen to have heard of it and can tell me anything. He just leaned back in his chair and smiled and said, if you can handle the course, you don't need me.
Wow. Wow.
and that's when I quit therapy.
And he was right, actually.
Yes,
Think about
yes.
that. Just right.
We had exhausted what, attentive listening could do. I
Mm.
needed a more direct confrontation with my way of thinking. And for me, and I don't know that I'm very careful when I talk to people about chronic fatigue syndrome that I'm not saying this is the case for everyone.
Mhm.
But over the years of working with the course, it became clear to me that the primary stressor on my immune system was anger.
Mhm.
And it was a long, deeply buried anger I was not dealing with. I didn't even know how to face it, much less deal with it. And the course did not cure me in the sense of being magic incantations that produced miraculous effect, but it took me deep into that anger, forced me to confront it. And it was through that process that I eventually healed. It took 7 years. And in that, I consider myself lucky. I've known people with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia for 20, 25 years who are not making progress. And I sometimes wonder, and I don't know for sure, if it's because they have not dealt with the deep subsurface anger. And in that regard, I always think of what Ken said in identifying the course as a via negativa, a negative way. So despite the fact that it's full of positive light affirmations,
it negates a lot.
Yeah, and he said, for instance, the lesson "I am the light of the world" doesn't mean you should sit back and imagine yourself glowing. He said, if that lesson is working, you'll be horrified by the darkness that comes up. Now, my experience as a student was unusual because having been a journalist, almost as soon as I got started with it, I got interested in its story. Relatively little had been written about it by then, and it was either entirely negative or it came from one of the foundations taking care of the course, so it was entirely positive. So I started doing my first writing about it, and that was how I got to know so many people. I briefly met Bill Thetford. I worked for years with Judy Scutch. Ken, I interviewed him, many times. So I came at it not just as a student, but as an investigator, basically, and that made it a different experience from the beginning.
You said something really interesting, and I want to go back a little bit to that before I ask you another question. You said that, and I don't hear that often, and when I do, I want to talk about it. The Course in Miracles does not talk to us as a person. The Course in Miracles does not talk to me as a woman, to you as a man, as a writer, journalist, professor. Does not talk to me as a person. And this is what you alluded to a moment ago. And I find that fascinating. It is this that was the hook for me. That I've always had this realization, and it's, close your eyes, Patrick, for a moment. Close your eyes for a moment, right? If we are to abandon time for a second and abolish our past, do you see yourself as a man? But do you feel like you're a man? Do I feel like I'm a woman? Do I feel like I'm a person? And the answers to me is no. No, I'm none of those things, right? And so the Course to me spoke to me as that, as what am I then? Who is the me living in the world? And it spoke to that question directly. And so that intrigued me to no end, that there is actually a document that acknowledges that talks about that and sheds light on the possibility that I am pure consciousness and I am part of something much greater. And that a lot of the things that don't exist when I go through that exercise, right, sheds light to my own negation of what is unreal.
It's interesting because I have just been working on an essay. It's not published yet, which I call The Spirituality of the Strong Ego. And in it, I talk about how the Course constantly speaks in second person. It speaks to you, but then it distinguishes that from the ego. Now, Ken called that you, the observer self, but you don't see that term in the Course. And, the Course is speaking to a sort of a mysterious being while warning you away from the ego, then turning around and saying, do not be afraid of the ego. And in this essay, what I'm talking about is basically the idea of, accepting that split in ourselves and realizing that a strong ego is one that doesn't make noise, isn't constantly proclaiming and defending itself. It's merged with that mysterious you, but it's something that you nonetheless need to get by in the world. I have an old friend who has frontotemporal dementia, which is similar to Alzheimer's, but it often sets in younger. It hit her in her 50s. And we did an interview in which she talked about how, scary it was to be losing her sense of where she was, what she was doing. She was trying to make coffee in a blender and couldn't figure out why it didn't work. She would be forgetting things. And she said a really interesting thing. She said, it's one thing to want to lose your ego. And it's another one, it just goes away. and you realize you can't function, And so I've been thinking along this line of when the Course says, do not be afraid of the ego because you made it up. It makes me aware of that it's a part of our mind that we made up in order to deal with this reality, but
it's like it's a context through which conflict arises and forces us into doing something about it.
Yeah. And we kind of have to it's a paradox of.
It is a paradox.
We have to be kind.
Yes.
To this part of the mind that can be very destructive to our well-being,
and not to get caught in the rah of the ego,
right?
Which would say do.
Right, because most people, if they heard, we say strong ego, they would think a loud, boisterous, overpowering Donald Trump state of mind.
Narcissistic psychopath.
Right. To me, that's a very weak ego. That's a shattered ego. It that does not have the assistance and the supervision of the bigger you that the Course is speaking to. So, when you ask that question, who is the Course? The Course is not talking to us in the usual sense. It is talking to, it's just reminding us that we're
the decision maker. Yeah.
Bigger than the self that we identify with, and that we kind of have to identify with as long as we believe that we're here, There was a very interesting book by neuroscientist Jill Bolte Taylor called My Stroke of Insight. Do you know that book?
No, I don't.
Oh, it's an amazing book. She was
My Stroke of Insight. What a great title.
She's a neuroscientist.
Yeah. So she had a stroke?
She had a massive stroke. And I mean, it knocked her to the floor. And because she was a neuroscientist, she knew what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
But she said she found herself on the floor, immobilized,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
realized that a whole section of her brain had shut down,
Mm-hmm.
and that she needed help quick, and she had to like struggle to get to the telephone and remember how it worked and what numbers were, then remember a number to call. But the flip side of that, she wrote about, was that
She was still in there.
no, she was merged with everything. She was leaning against the wall and she felt at one with it. And she said it was incredibly blissful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the book is about how her realization that blissful merging with everything is, in a sense, reality, but we can't function in that state, And so she said it wasn't getting back to normal, and it took her, some years. It wasn't just a matter of relearning skills, but of putting that bliss aside, putting that oneness with everything aside so she could function.
What an interesting perspective.
She has a lot of videos up, and the original book was called My Stroke of Insight. The name's Jill Bolte Taylor.
Because I
so,
thought, mm-hmm.
And so that was when I read that, and she did not come from a meditation background or anything. She was pure neuroscientist. What she's done since is teach meditative techniques to help people experience a taste of that blissful state of oneness, but still function, Wow. And I think the course is so difficult because it's trying to help us manage the same balancing act, of how do you still function in the world with a necessary degree of ego, saying, I am this person and I do this and I have this identity and I have this profession, and yet not be absorbed by it, not get lost in it. Because if that's all you have, you'll end up miserable.
Yes. Yeah. The course really tries to help you to identify yourself with a decision maker, and then choose.
Yeah.
That's one step no one can take for us.
Right.
Really.
And I think over time you have to get adjusted to the fact that you never achieve enlightenment. You never achieve that oneness with everything. It's a back and forth, a process of negotiation. You get a glimpse of it, you get scared, you back off, and you learn, just as the neuroscientist did, that if you're going to function here, you need a sense of self that is separate. While the Course tells us that ultimately the separation is a delusion.
Never happened.
Right. But the irony is that the ego can jump in. The ego loves all that talk, and it can jump in and say, yeah, let's be enlightened. Yeah, let's be one with everything, or appear to be. And soon you're off on a different you're off on a spiritual delusion, a spiritual bypass of pretending that you're at one with everything. And that can be very, seductive and cause all kinds of problems on its own. And I often think, like, God bless the people who are not even aware that they have an ego, that they're so absorbed in it, that none of these questions or difficulties ever arise. They just live the life of the ego and they get through and they do okay. And it's why, after all my years of writing about the Course, helping other writers get published about the Course, I almost never recommend it to anyone.
It's not the path for everyone. It really isn't.
Yeah,
And it is so tricky, especially for an unhealthy ego, to get a hold of A Course in Miracles and start reading things literally.
yeah,
And you know, and not be able to hear the mellows. If you can't hear the mellows of this book, really put it aside. Just pick anything else up. Choose another path, because really, this is just not for everyone. It is.
I once had a funny experience of, I did recommend it to
A friend,
a young woman I was working with, trying to help her write her book, and she was stuck on it, and I said, I never do this, but I'm going to recommend that you look into the course a little bit. And I gave her one of the small compact versions, and then I just let it go. I didn't.
Yeah.
And but about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks later, we were on the phone, and she said, "Oh, that blue book you gave me?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "My maid lost it." And I don't even know what, and that was a lesson to me of, you don't recommend this, because their maid, it wasn't I lost it, my maid lost it.
How do you even answer that?
And I just realized, she probably didn't even crack it open,
Yeah.
and so you can't. The same thing happened years ago when, for 5 years, the course was licensed to a major publisher, to Viking Press. And it's an experiment that Judy and the rest of the board tried. And the Viking is, a major publisher, and they intended to make it a bestseller. The course had always sold about 40,000 copies a year, which actually is a bestseller level, but it's not astronomical. Viking thought they would sell hundreds of thousands.
They're going to do better.
Yeah. And so they put it in all the bookstores, and they put it in, like, in Barnes and Noble's, the front of Barnes and Noble. It was in what's called a dump. That's a big stack of books meant to draw attention. And when it came out, I went to a Barnes and Noble and just stood near the dump of the course for a while to see what happened. And without fail, I saw like 5 people in a row come in, pick it up, open it up, and go, shut it and put it back. And I realized this isn't going to work. Like,
no, it's not going to work. No.
And
there is no world. Not maybe. There is no world.
So
it's the one lesson the course attempts to teach. You don't get that?
Interesting bit of
never be a popular course.
Interesting bit of publishing history was that after 5 years, even though it didn't succeed the way Viking wanted it, they sold, guess what, 40,000 copies a year. And that was good enough that they wanted to continue it. And they went to Judy and said, "We'd like to renew the contract." And she said, "Why? You're selling the same number of copies we can sell." And she told me, she said, "Then I understood. The course finds people, not the other way around."
Beautiful. Bless you, Judy. Yeah.
You don't make it widely available so that everybody can find it, because it won't make any difference.
No, it won't.
And I have heard, since I've interviewed hundreds of course students over the years, I've heard 3 entirely separate stories at different times of people telling me that they were wandering through a used bookstore that had stacks of books.
And the book fell in their lap.
No, the course fell off the top of a stack and hit them on the head.
Oh,
3 times. 3 different people.
Dear me, that's a concussion. A hit or a blow to the head. Hello, that's a concussion. They needed it that badly, Patrick?
Yes. Lord knows how many times that has happened over the years.
It's interesting. We're talking about healthy or unhealthy ego. We're talking about the course talking to the unconscious mind. making you aware that you're the decision maker. You are right. This is really not the spiritual path for everyone. If you are unprepared and if you have an unhealthy ego by your description of ego, I can see this. You could read this course and taking it out of context, reading it literally, and finding reasons to confirm a behavior that has nothing to do with, removing the blocks to the awareness of love's constant presence in our life. It has nothing to do with that. And if anything, it can reinforce bad behavior, unkind behavior, deceitful behavior, aggressive, abusive behavior. So, and just like everything else, you can, depending on how ready you are to understand the material and how much work you've done to get where you are,
Right.
You can use it, and it could take you to a place where you want to go and achieve peace of mind.
Yeah.
Or it can simply reinforce a madness that already exists within, and amplify it.
If you think that the course consistently induces love, peace, and harmony, just visit any discussion group online. And sooner or later, you'll see someone complain, why is everyone in here so mean? Why is And I think that's because, it's that whole idea, the via negativa. The course is not about filling us with light, but facing the darkness. That's why the very beginning of the book says the intention of the course is not to teach the meaning of love, for that cannot be taught. It's to remove the obstacles to the awareness of love. Removing the obstacles means you have to face them. So when people are on discussion groups and they're at each other's throats over what the course means, they are, skillfully or not, running into those obstacles.
Yet, how beautiful is that process of being able to look within and look at what's coming up and understanding that you're not bad. I'm not bad. I'm not a bad person. I'm not. It's my belief in what's in there that I projected. That is the issue, is the belief. And that journey to the decision maker, to the realization of who I am and the choice is just beautiful. And the moment you get that, of course, you become enamored with it. And that's where the journey and that the unfoldment of the lotus flowers really happens in that space. Okay, Patrick, question for you. Okay, so you've been exposed to the Course in Miracles since 1985. You said 85?
Yes.
Yeah, 85. And you've got to come across Bill, and you've met Judy and the Foundation for Inner Peace and the many. And I know you also published Gary's book, The Disappearance of the Universe. And there's that precious story as to how that came about. I know there's also a story about, how you published your book and what happened with various editors and how you navigated that. That is absolutely precious. And I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that today, but I'm hoping that I might be able to twist your arm and bring you back so we can have a conversation about that, because it's a beautiful story. And to me, it has a very precious message. But what I want to ask you is, in your view, how do we cultivate, Patrick, based on your own experience, how do we cultivate peace of mind through A Course in Miracles?
Well, I don't know that we always do. As I said, it because it's a process of facing those obstacles again and again. Now, and in my experience, what happens with breaking through an obstacle or releasing a grievance is that yes, you do encounter a period of peace and stability after that, until the next bigger obstacle makes itself known. But over time, it does change just change the nature of the way you relate to the world. I remember a story that and the one time I interviewed David Hoffmeister, he told me a story I've never forgotten of that. He'd just been a course student for a few years, and he was living in Cincinnati, I think. And he was standing one day on a street corner waiting for a bus when a bus backfired, and it sounded exactly like a gunshot. And he said, all around me, everybody hit the pavement. He said, except me. He said, because it immediately registered, oh, that was a bus backfire. And he realized that before the course, he would have thought it was a gunshot too. And so he had come just far enough with his perceptions were clarified. He responded to stimuli with less fear. So he could make that little distinction, which may not have seemed that important, but it means, he lived with that much less stress. He lived with that much less aggression, that he could distinguish a backfire from a gunshot.
Yeah.
And I think there are many subtle ways like that in which the course changes us without our always being aware of it. I remember when I was doing my heavy lifting with the course in the first few years, working through the chronic anger about my family, that I would feel like I was progressing nowhere with the main issues I was working on. But littler things were going away. Like an example, like I would no longer get aggravated in traffic. It had never been a big concern to me, but like anyone else, I would, it was annoyance. I'd get angry. I'd have a little bit of road rage. And I noticed that, oh, my central grievance with my parents is not going anywhere. But off to the side here, the way I respond to the world on a daily basis is changing. I don't get upset about the number of things that I used to get upset about. I don't get so upset about insults or someone attempting to attack me and that one I understand. I understand why I became less sensitive to people trying to attack me, because I learned from the course that they were attacking themselves first. And that was their whole purpose, whether they knew it or not. And I've had a number of, inspiring experiences with that of seeing people's aggression as first and foremost their attack on themselves. And that gives you a completely different response as to how to respond. The course tells us that everything that someone does can be seen as an expression
for love or an expression of love.
Cry for love or expression of love. In either case, how do you respond?
Yeah.
And I think part of what over time is you get much better at recognizing cries for love and not having to defend yourself against them. Because if you defend yourself against them, then you do what the other person has done. You attack yourself first. Yeah. Of course, it's very clear that to believe we can defend ourselves or have to defend ourselves is an attack. And I didn't probably get that for the first 10 or 15 years, That's why I always tell people, they say, well, how long does it really take to get the course? And I often say, well, 10
how
years.
Long do you have?
Yeah, all right. After 10 years, you can say you started. And I would say, in terms of achieving peace or living with a greater degree of peace, I've been doing it so long that I don't sit down and study the book very much anymore. It's that in the course of a day, what comes into my mind are lessons, principles, ideas, it's like a majority of my old thinking has been replaced with this other way of thinking. It does not make everything peaceful, but it makes me less angry, makes me less have less tendency to attack. And in that sense, I'm much more peaceful. I was just telling a friend recently how funny it was that just before I got sick, chronic fatigue, I was about 32. I had thought that I pretty much knew all I would need to know for the rest of my life. that I was on top of things. And because I'd been an investigative reporter, that my conclusions about what life was like was that the world was in terrible shape and it was somebody's fault. And my job was to find out who that was and make sure they got identified. how they got
punished.
Right. Well, that wasn't up to me. I was just a reporter. I didn't want to get into the messy business of
just wanted to shed the light, and then that's it. Let them figure it out.
No interest in law enforcement or the administration of justice. I was just going to find the bad guys, And so after my first year or so of the course, I realized, au contraire, I didn't know anything. I knew.
Welcome to my world.
I remember long periods of just waking up thinking, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I know nothing. And realizing that, everything was a constant learning process. Whereas before, without being quite aware of it, my thinking was preoccupied with justifying what I believed. And the course just shook the hell out of that, because it shook apart everything I believed. So I couldn't justify.
Shed a light that that's a created story, that's my story, and I made it up. That it's powerful. It's not comfortable. Comfortable.
Wow. So the question of there have been. I wrote recently about probably the greatest few hours of happiness that I've known in my life was when I was at my most ill. I was at my most alone. I had the greatest sense of failure. The only thing I was getting done in a day was studying some of the course. and I suddenly just became unreasonably happy. And it wasn't just a matter of having nothing left to lose. It was what the course is getting at it when it says happiness is my function here. And so I had been the illness and everything attached to it had robbed all my functions, previous functions. I couldn't work. I wasn't in a intimate relationship. I wasn't. All of that was gone, and so I should have been the most miserable person in the world, and sometimes and often I was. But for this, it was a fairly brief stretch of a day, 5 or 6 hours. I was just in this blissful state of being happy about nothing, which in course terms means getting back to who you are. And then after a while, everything filled back in. I was still sick. I was still struggling. And I would say I still go through that process. Now, I think, with everything that's been going on and seeming to go on in the world for the past couple of years, everybody's struggling with, their sense of who they are, what they're here for. Are they here just to be running scared of all the frightful things that are impinging on us? Um, and I'll still sometimes hit these much smoother spots of realizing how ultimately unimportant all those concerns are. And that instead of, I guess the discipline I've been working on the most in the past year is, instead of struggling to work things out, make sure I'm safe and get everything in order, I'll remember those experiences of happiness and remember that it's actually that root condition of happiness that will heal all these things. It's not that you heal all these challenges and then you're happy. It's summed up in that lesson, I choose the joy of God instead of pain. Because pain is ever present.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think we've chosen it.
Mm-hmm.
And the discipline of the course is remembering, yes, you did choose it. And there's another choice. And that other choice of joy, that's what resolves the pain. Not trying to fix the pain, not trying to get your life in order, not trying to make sure you're safe and so forth. And that's that's a discipline. That's the main reason I don't recommend the course to anyone, because it's kind of like saying, oh, how would you like to have a daily, exceptionally demanding discipline for the next 4 or 5 decades?
Mm. How have your priorities changed in light of the course and the coursework that you've been doing?
Well, before I encountered the course, I had, when I was younger, I had the goal of being a famous writer.
Uh-huh.
It was something I would do in my
You are
own.
a famous writer.
Well, be that as it may. And it's always funny, because when I first read, Judy Scutch gave me one of Helen's versions of her autobiography. And I just laughed out loud when I encountered the lines where she said that when she was young, she said, I had a secret dream. She says, I would be a famous writer. I would live by myself and be better than everyone else. And then she said, in light of this secret dream, the difficulty I had in writing anything was extremely frustrating. And Ken always told the story that Helen, even though she was an accomplished academic and wrote many papers that had nothing to do with the course, that she had a terrible time writing, except for the course. It came to her automatically.
And she did say that if it says anything that is rubbish or it makes no sense, it makes a leap in logic, she is done with it.
Yeah,
that was her thread throughout. Another reason for which I got hooked. It's impeccable.
Yeah.
From a logic point of view.
Back at that time, then when I was young and thought I would be young writer, one thing I never expected, I never expected to do was to help other writers, for instance. And it's now one of the major things I do. I still do my own writing, but I'm an agent, an editor, and publishing consultant, and so that was a huge shift in purpose, for me, and it took some years, and I went into it, reluctantly. When I discovered Gary, I was very reluctant about his book, and of course that turned.
And his book has done pretty good.
Yes. Hey, it came out of nowhere. He was nobody. It made no sense.
Oh my goodness. And look at him now.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah.
my goodness.
And
Books
so,
translated, and I don't know how many languages, over 26 languages. And
yeah.
yeah.
And I've helped, a number of other people get published, either on their own or so that was one of the biggest shifts was
Seeing others' interests as your own in a way, because you were helping
yeah,
them along. So, oh, interesting. Interesting.
yeah, that the to the point where the idea of being a famous writer on my own just lost its appeal. I mean, I have done a dozen books, and some people know what I've done, and then others don't, and I do constantly have to remind new clients, people who are unpublished, that fame and fortune is not a motivation for writing. It's the first thing that will lead you astray. You have to be writing for the love of writing itself, and because you feel that you have something to teach. And those have to be your justifications, because the chances are, the Gary Renards of the world aside, if you publish
Gary,
yourself,
we just put you in your own category.
right? If you publish yourself, you're probably going to lose money. You're probably never going to get it back. And you can't be focused on, I've worked with a number of younger people who have to go through this thing of, they think that succeeding as a writer is going to save them. Then they'll be somebody. Then they'll, and which just goes to show how much most people don't know about the publishing industry. That even at the top level, most books fail. And the publishing industry runs on bestsellers, which is why they're so obsessed with finding them, But 90% of the books that are put out there don't make the publisher's investment back. And so I'm sort of constantly reminding new writers, do this because you have to, this is something you have to say. And just as important, because it changes you to write it. Many of the most successful writers, the ones who do write the bestsellers, are often, especially if they've done a number of books in a genre like thrillers or romance or so forth, they're just filling out a formula. And they may even be hiring writers to ghost for them. The writing succeeds, but it's not an instrument of their own change, and that's why I've always approached writing as a spiritual discipline in itself. It can't be the only thing you do, but it's that it's a superb way of recognizing and facing those obstacles to the awareness of love's presence. And for certain people, it's the best way.
Yeah.
Those are the people who are natural born writers. It just comes to them to work things out that way. And often I will, if I'm really disturbed by something, often I'm working with a course idea or lesson, and it actually really disturbs me. And to get through the obstacle, I have to write about it. And then the peacefulness comes. And that's just because, as the course puts it, we each have a unique way to forgive. That's our unique function. And for real writers, writing is their particular function of forgiveness.
Wow.
It's the way they do it.
Beautiful. Well said.
Other artists do it other ways, and it doesn't necessarily have to be an art either. It could be the way you do business, but
Which brings me to my next question for you. What is forgiveness as far as the Course is concerned? How do you view it? And what's the process and the practice of forgiveness that the Course emphasizes?
Well, I think in my experience, it starts at a certain level and then descends through deeper and deeper levels. Like when I was ill, the first thing I needed to do was face the anger about my family of origin growing up with a mother who was bipolar and schizophrenic. And so it started with forgiving people and events. But after a certain point, you realize that your problems are not all that unique. Everyone has dealt with trauma in their family of origin or their early life in some way. And so you're always, and your particular story is not so important once you've worked through it. So you drop down to this other level of realizing, oh, the world is like this. So I'm really, now that I've gotten past my drop beneath my personal issues, I'm dealing with the way the world seems to be.
The micro is the same with the macro. Mm.
Right.
Mhm.
And eventually, I think as you get deeper and deeper, you get to that the course level of the deepest course level of forgiveness is letting go of everything. You know,
Letting go of your attachment to
right.
everything.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's where the deepest peace comes from, even if it doesn't last, even if it's just because the temptation, we can experience a very powerful temptation to not be peaceful. To even if we have it, to let it go, because we're so used to that upset and turmoil and involvement with the world. That's reality. Whereas if you get really peaceful, you hit that level of the course lesson that says, I need do nothing.
Except not interfere.
I need do nothing. And that's the point at which what we call the ego really kicks in and says, what the hell does that mean?
What do you mean I need to do nothing? I need to go to the bank. Oh my goodness, I need to pay my mortgage. And where are the kids? Gee, I need to cook some supper. And we have to go this weekend. We're traveling.
Right. So, and it's not like you master the more superficial levels of forgiveness in terms of forgiving particular people, and then get to those other levels. You're even in the course of a day, you can be dealing with every level that there is. Somebody can annoy or irritate you, and you have to work at that level. Or you can get a sense of the misery the world is in, and you're dealing with it at that level. But and it can be very difficult. The only thing that's more difficult is going through life not forgiving anything. And that's where so much violence comes from.
Yes.
People trying to get even, trying to get vengeance, trying to set things right. And so they think that attacking someone is the way to set things right, not realizing that attack always hurts yourself first. I think that's, to me, one of the most profound lessons of the Course is that every self-defense is an attack. And we think we're self-defending to keep away attack.
Tell me more about that. That's very powerful. And indeed, yes, the Course teaches that every self-defense is an attack.
Yeah, well, I don't want to turn things political, but my reigning example in mind that is Donald Trump, because his niece, who's a psychologist, has written so much about him that he appears to be, and you can see it without reading a psychologist, you can see by listening to him, this is a miserable person. This is a really deeply suffering person who's constantly desperate for validation and constantly going on the attack to get that validation. To the world, to some of the world anyway, it looks like he has a very successful ego. Looks like he's, achieved a lot by being aggressive, attacking, and constantly on the prowl for validation. He has a niece who's done much more psychological work. She doesn't talk in spiritual terms at all. She talks in psychological terms about how growing up in that family mindset was so difficult for her that she still suffers from PTSD, and she has more of a grasp of what's going on. But you can, as I say, I sometimes envy the people who don't even know that they're living an ego life. They're just living life and trying to get by. But in certain cases, no, I don't envy that, because I see how much, damage it does. And I think when I was younger, especially before the Course, I had much more a tendency to unconsciously lash out. I get what the psychologist was called passive aggressive tendency.
Yeah.
I learned that from my dad. And so I think over the long term, the Course resolves a lot of the internal battle. And that so many people are accustomed to living with. And you get there by learning to moment by moment forgive everything you see, which is just and to me, forgiveness sort of step one of forgiveness is humility, of saying, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what just transpired. I don't know the meaning of what that person just said. Or as the Course says, I do not know the thing I am, or what I'm supposed to do here. And then the second part of it is developing the trust over time that you don't have to know.
Beautiful.
That what you need to do next will be shown to you. And I remember many times when, especially my earliest years with the Course, struggling with forgiving things. And I remember having a very important experience with my parents. I won't go into here, but afterward, I realized that I couldn't really be angry with them anymore, because I had reached the fundamental realization that they were just two people who did the best they could and failed. They were never out to harm me.
No.
Now, I have known people whose parents were out to harm them.
They did the best they could.
I've known people whose parents were out to harm them, and that's a different thing. Yeah. But in my case, they just failed. They just did the best they could, and they failed. When I hit that realization, I realized I wasn't really I couldn't be angry 24/7 anymore. And so
It takes
the
effort to maintain that anger, to remember it. I mean, really,
yeah,
that's just like I'm a slave to that incident and going over it and maintaining it, making sure
right,
it's polished. And I don't forget details.
right.
Because it
And
won't have the same effect then.
what was so strange is this disorientation immediately set in where I started to think, well, what do I do now? What do I do with all this time? Because I suddenly realized I was angry 24/7 and it took up all my time. And now what?
No one.
And so another level of forgiveness is realizing that if you get your angers and grievances out of the way, there will be enough to do. And it will be better than what you were doing before. You can trust that something else will fill in.
You'll be surprised how much there is in the
Yeah.
unconscious coming up for us to deal with. Somebody said once that not to forgive is like drinking poison and expecting somebody else to die from it.
Right.
It's so true. But back to that word of defenselessness, and an attack. I don't know. I know the lesson well, but I don't know why it stroked me differently today in this conversation. The whole idea of defenselessness. If I defend myself, I'm attacked.
Right. Right.
The question is, who is attacked? And
Right.
spend some time on that realm. Patrick, the premise on which this whole podcast is predicated, at least when I started it, was I wanted to do something for, I work with cancer patients. And a lot of cancer patients are also A Course in Miracles students. And I said, let me start a conversation about what it means to be a student of the course and then have to be faced with this major identification forgiveness lesson, because we identify with the body, and then when the rubber meets the road and the body starts failing and things go down the road, is really tough, no matter how many years you've worked with a course. And you've had to face illness and you had to face emotional turmoil. And so do cancer patients. A lot of the patients that I talk about emotional cancer that was there prior to the cancer kicking in and any body parts starting to fail. And the importance of dealing with that, looking at where our pain comes from, and seeing perhaps what role do we play, and how can we empower ourselves in dealing with some of that pain that is surfacing and perhaps we don't look at, or we don't want to validate it, we don't want to deal with it, we don't want to understand where it's coming from and how we could depart from it.
Right.
What can you say something, or do you have something to say about that that might be helpful to our listeners based on your experience?
The thing that comes to mind is a story I heard from several different people about Ken Wapnick's last few months. I think he died of lung cancer.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
And
a friendly tumor.
And I heard this story told, I say, by several different people in slightly different ways, but that when it became known that Ken's diagnosis was terminal, but he was still functioning at the Foundation Teaching Center, that students who came there were just beside themselves with grief and would go up to him weeping, or want to know how he was doing. And apparently he developed kind of a stock response of patting everyone on the shoulder and said, remember, this isn't happening. Now, I've never achieved that level of awareness, but I can just see him doing that in this kindly way of, remember, in the face of everything, this isn't actually happening.
Yeah,
and
to the last moment, to the last breath, he kept telling Gloria that it's okay. I'm not dying. It's
Right.
happening.
And how I related to that was that I went through, hundreds of times with an autoimmune condition like chronic fatigue. You can have everything going wrong at once. When I was diagnosed, they had a set of 16 symptoms for chronic fatigue syndrome, and I had 13 of them. They would say if you had 9, they would give you the diagnosis. I had 13. And it
There was no
was
doubt you had that diagnosis.
traveling muscle pains, constant severe abdominal pain, mental fog, unrefreshing sleep. And from day to day, it was something different.
Yeah.
And I would often have the experience of being in the grip of one of these symptoms and feeling this will never go away. This is going to do me in, this will never go away. And then the next day it would be gone, but there'd be something else. And I remember I often caught myself thinking, well, what happened to that thing that was going to last forever? And now it's suddenly gone. And I realized it was because the illness had a kind of intelligence. It was like moving through the body and illuminating in a very harsh light different aspects of why and how I was suffering. Now, as I say, this may be just peculiar to an autoimmune condition, where, as my doctor had told me, he said, AIDS, for instance, is degenerative. He says your immune system is being destroyed. He says in an autoimmune condition, your immune system is in overdrive. It's overreacting. It's over defending constantly. It's a different thing. And that's why he said, you're not actually dying. You're just going to wish you would. And so that was very meaningful to me, the idea that my body was a constant state of hyper defense while I'm studying the course that tells me to defend myself is an attack. I was literally living it every day at a physical level that seemed uncontrollable. And, it's been a long time since I've had the chronic fatigue syndrome. I still, particularly the last couple of years, I've struggled a lot with anxiety, with cortisol being out of control. And I've developed this very keen observation that if I get a cortisol surge, I am afraid of nothing and everything at once. It's the fight or flight syndrome. And I don't even have to be particularly anxious about something. It just seems like it's just a chemical surge. And I'm sure I'm not alone in that experience.
No, you're not. There's an epidemic there of anxiety, loneliness, disconnect, depression.
Yeah.
It's much more prevalent than we're ready to.
And I think, that high level of realization that Ken had in his last months, it's where I think we all have to get eventually. You, in the usual sense, cannot use the course to cure illness. And that contradicts some things that the course says. But the course is, because it does say that the body can be healed. But the precondition, the thing you have to remember, is that the course is always saying the body is entirely in the mind. It's entirely a fiction. You heal your mind. If you heal your mind, it doesn't really matter what happens to your body. That's basically what the course is saying. And it even says, when its purpose is done, it will be gently laid aside. So it acknowledges what we call death. while also saying in a broader sense, death can't possibly be real, but we believe in it. And, I think just because Ken could say, I'm not dying, this isn't real, doesn't mean he didn't go through the process. But how much better for him it had to be, and better for everyone around him, than the way Helen Schuckman passed, which was because she had pancreatic cancer, which is often associated with psychosis. Everyone agrees it was a horrible thing to witness, because she, despite having written down the course, she had no forgiveness. She was not able to utilize it. She, Ken said it was only at the very end when she had passed that she had a look of peace on her face.
Beautiful peace on her face, yeah.
But that she fought, right to the minute, and also the contrast with the story of how Bill Thetford passed. That on his last day, he was telling Judy that he was free.
I'm free. I'm free. Look at me.
I'm free. He'd forgiven everyone.
Yeah.
And then he was gone. With probably sudden heart attack, very little suffering.
Yeah, and I think I'm mindful, and I was talking to Carol Howe the other day about this. You look at Helen, okay, so she passed of pancreatic cancer. She was in distress, but she had this beautiful, peaceful smile on her face. And then you see Bill, like you said, then look at Jesus. I mean, he's being crucified. I don't think, or at least I think for myself, my experiences, I can't judge. I cannot tell who's enlightened and who's not through the eyes of my mind. I really cannot. I could be looking at someone that is bound to a wheelchair and maybe, expressing things that to my mind are not in line with what my ever conceptualization of enlightenment and forgiveness is. And yet I could be looking at the most holy person on earth, So really, right. I don't believe, I don't want to, and I think Kenneth agreed with this idea that, we should not, I have no means to evaluating whether or not Helen was enlightened. I really don't. And I think I'm very mindful and very cautious, and call it humility, call it cautiousness, whatever you want to call it. Call it mind numbness, if you may. But I can't tell, because I know she was also very aware, more so aware about what the Course is than anybody else. Yeah. She was very clear. She really knew what it was saying. And so who am I to judge that may perhaps, and Kenneth said that many, many times, that there was a humility in her as well, with regards to how the egoic mind works, and how tricky it is, and the tricks that it plays on us. Maybe she was very realist about it. And maybe, her forgiveness process, which is not a badge of honor that people wear anyways, it's a very intimate process. We might judge that. Yeah.
And Bill told me in the one meeting that I had with him was that the most important thing to understand about Helen was that she was highly dissociated. And Judy echoed this. Two minds going on in her at all times.
Aren't we all dissociative though?
And that's the lesson.
Just like me.
We all are, yeah. And she just was to an extreme, that she could tune in, Bill said it was like tuning into a radio station. She could tune into the voice she heard, and was a remarkably different person. And then she'd come out of it and say, I don't want to have anything to do with that. The level at which she was a fearful ego. I will say, although I didn't, spend a lot of time with Ken, I didn't know him over a number of years from the time that he was running the school in upstate New York to Temecula. And talked to him a number of times. And he became, I saw him become a different person, much funnier, much warmer. When I interviewed him in New York, he was just, they were so stressed out about everything, about running that school. It was too much for him and Gloria,
Mhm.
you know, and the copyright suit was just beginning to boil up at that time. And I remember him being kind of harsher than in the later years when he taught at Temecula, that he was funny and warm and
Joyful, and yeah, he was just, yeah,
yeah,
you're right. Very
he changed.
lighthearted, very
Yeah,
lighthearted. Yeah.
yeah, he you know, he changed a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I think that, you know, those changes are in a sense what matters more than the condition of your illness, whatever it is.
Oh. Mm.
You know, the Ken achieving a state of acceptance and objectivity about his illness. It didn't cure his illness. You know, it still killed him. But what a difference in experience for himself and for those around him. You know, that when people wanted to come up and commiserate and sort of be reassured that it was really terrible, that he would just say, you know, don't worry, it's not happening. And just, you know, the sense of, you know, balance and ease. And I was just reading some of what, who was it? It was writing about Judy's passing. I guess it's something that Tam wrote, you know, that she was going in and out of pain and in and out of acceptance, you know. So I think it's with any illness, you have to learn the big shift I had to make in my illness, the way that I went from struggling with it to beginning to heal was to stop fighting it and instead take care of myself, which before the course, I would have thought, well, if you have a serious illness, you fight it. That is how you take care of yourself. And I know there's definitely that language in a lot of cancer treatment.
Yeah.
You fight it.
Yes.
You got to fight this thing.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
And
yes.
Wow. I think, in fact, it can be possible to fight it, but be forgiving it at the same time. You know, it's
by taking care of yourself.
Right. By
being kind and gentle towards yourself.
Because one of the things I had to learn was that for whatever reason I got sick, part of it was that prior to getting sick, I didn't really take very good care of myself. I didn't eat well. I didn't even know much about diet or nutrition. I didn't. More importantly, was learning how to take care of what went on in my mind instead of being preoccupied with the struggle, my mind struggling to deal with things. For me, switching from fighting the illness to taking care of myself did heal me by and large. Didn't get rid of all my physical problems forever, but that particular syndrome, I got over it in 7 years. And I think if I hadn't made that transition, I could still be struggling with it today. I know people who've gone, as I said, 25, 30 years, no progress or very little.
Wow, what an insight, Patrick.
Because the very process of taking care of yourself, committing to that, is choosing love, really removing the blocks to the awareness. And the blocks being what? My preoccupation. Do I need to fight this thing?
Right.
I need to spend energy and attention, which now they're not going to go towards healing. They're going to go out there in terms of how am I going to fight this thing?
Right.
Whereas, so it's how important is it? And it's funny. When you fly somewhere, you're being told in case of an emergency, 2 oxygen masks are going to come down. And if you are with a child, first put on the oxygen mask on your face, and then you put it on the child,
Right.
or the elderly person. But the same thing with this, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
What a simple and important message, because that is loving. That is what love would do.
Taking care of yourself is, in a way, taking care of everything.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
when you're battling something, you're excluding the world and saying, this is my
Yes.
private battle, and this is all I can do, and this is all.
More separation.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas when you switch to taking care of yourself, it, for me, it kind of broadened the base of who I was in touch with, and the kind of helpers or healers I chose to work with, because it was a different, the whole perspective was less isolating than that, battle against what's going wrong. But to say, that's not to say that you can't be, assertively doing what you need to do. With cancer, sometimes you need to use very aggressive therapies.
Yes.
And they don't always work, and sometimes they do. But I would have to think that part of what makes them work or not work is how you use them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I had a friend years ago, when I wrote for Yoga Journal magazine, the editor, Rick Fields, shortly after I started working there and met him, or he came on staff, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. And was
aggressive too. Lung,
and told that he had just a number of months to live. And his doctor said, if you've ever wanted to, go to India or something, now's the time while you have time left. And he just said, been to India. Been there, done that. He said, I just want to be present and aware. And he, in fact, after his diagnosis, lasted 2 years. And he was often at work with his chemo on a pack on his belt. He literally worked through it. And he got, he married his longtime girlfriend while he had just several weeks left.
Wow.
And he was mostly blind. He had to be helped down the aisle. But all that said, he had become this, when I knew him, there was still this lingering presence of the hard drinking, formerly smoking, which probably had to do with the lung cancer, tough New Yorker type, and he became such a warmer, kinder presence, even through the suffering. And that was one thing I learned, was that almost every time I came through a crisis with my illness, the output, the end stage, the thing that healed me was becoming kinder. And when I once tried to trick Ken and said, how would you summarize the course in one sentence? And I expected him to say that's not possible. And he said, oh, that's easy. Try to be a little kinder. And he said, I put it that way because he said, I don't just say be kinder. He says, because the ego will jump all over that. and say, oh, sure, I can be kind. He says, as course students, we have to remember that it's an effort. And the lessons over and over are saying, try to be a little kinder. Just try it, and I would say that every time kindness is always the output of the healing experience for me. It's always the end stage. And there are times when I will feel skeptical of that and think, well, you don't want to end up too kind. The fear that kindness equals passivity or something, which is not the case. Because it's what when people would come up to Ken while he was dying and be miserable and he would say, remembering this is not happening, that was kindness. He was basically saying, don't take this on. This is mine.
Yeah.
This is mine. I'm dealing with it.
Yeah. It's all right. It's okay.
It doesn't have to be real for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that he wasn't denying what was happening. It was an act of kindness of saying, this is mine and let me deal with it.
Yeah, I'm reflecting a lot about, I don't know why my mind is going to Helen Schuckman, and her scribing something and then saying, I don't want to talk about it. Let's just, let it lie. And I can't help but to think, and I'm observing my own life. So many have been the occasions where I am doing the forgiveness. I am going into the decision maker. And Patrick, I do not want to talk about it. I do, because it's why would I talk about with something that I've projected? You know what I mean? So my mind and my focus is on that whole process, and the rest really becomes insignificant in a way. So why would I give it attention as if it's there when I'm already busy there doing that whole, being engaged in that? So you see, because of that, that's why I'm skeptical. I'm questioning myself, not to judge, just I've learned, and I don't know, maybe I don't find it natural to judge anymore. No matter how evident it is.
Right. Yeah, I think, and that's a healing process that can be very slow, because, especially for me, judgment was so important early in my life. I was an investigative reporter. That's what I did. I passed judgment and identified the villains, and
I'm aware.
And although I had dropped out of that before I get ill, but simply because I realized, after getting involved in a couple different investigations, I realized, okay, if I help get rid of one bad guy, there will be another one. That's the nature of politics.
It will never end. It will never end.
And the
brother,
I guess one of the biggest shocks for me with the course was that it gradually introduced me to the idea that if I really wanted to identify the bad guy, I had to look in the mirror.
Beautiful. You see that? I'm with you. I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. The world I see is the outer picture of my, not yours,
Right.
In your condition.
Right.
Waking to that reality is quite a cold shower.
Yes.
Well, Patrick, this has been wonderful. There's much more I want to talk to you about, but I'm mindful of the time.
Okay.
And I'm really hoping that maybe I can twist your arm and ask you to come back again for a second.
Sure.
I would love that.
Sure. Yeah. I'd enjoy it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for sharing your love and wisdom and reflections with us tonight. I'm sure there's much for all of us to take from what you shared. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
And this concludes my interview with D. Patrick Miller. For more information on Patrick's work, please visit his website at www.dpatrickmiller.com. Until next time, be well and take care of yourselves.